Seems to be working. This is the first garage stream. Gonna be replacing the header gaskets on my truck. See how this works. And that's 7/16. So I put a gasket on here a couple years ago, and it wasn't necessarily the best. It was a cheap one, and it fit the need. It did what I needed it to do, but right now it's cheap, so it's leaking again. So I got to replace it. All right, 3/8. Looks like it's up. It's up and moving. Okay. Really got a precarious setup right now. My camera is literally sitting on the edge of my truck on the side of the fender, being propped up by a box. So I'm afraid of knocking it over. also feel a little ridiculous because I'm streaming this, essentially just talking to myself. This isn't going to be too long of a stream for this part. Okay. Please don't fall. It's the New York rust. Magnetic tray. Is the apps open on my phone? Come on. Okay, back to business. One problem I have is these screws like to back out. Probably tighten them up 2 or 3 times. I'm hesitant to use Loctite because what I don't want is the Loctite to get frozen in there and then break a bolt off in the head. That's a nightmare. If you've never had a broken bolt, that's one thing, but in the cylinder head, it's kind of hard to take the part off without halfway disassembling the engine. Get the gloves. Nope, that's the wrong book. These gloves are great because I can keep my dexterity without losing. So I can keep my hands pretty clean without compromising dexterity. Sometimes I gotta take the glove off, but it's better than those really thick gloves. Two more bolts. This will be ready to pop that gasket off of there. Drop that one. I'm not careful. There we go. This is the one I don't like. Let's see what I'm doing. This one right here is always in a bad spot. The header tube bends right around it. And I can't really get to it. It's a nightmare. And it's already loose. It's like the only one I can't really tighten up readily because of its position. So I can only get it so tight with opening a wrench. There's all the bolts. Sneak this old gasket out of here. So this one was leaking around here. You can see where it didn't really seal too well. And these like compressed metal gaskets, like, they really suck. You can see right there, definitely. It's definitely leaking past that point. So they're not very flexible. It's too kind of, I guess you call it corrugated or perforated metal plates with some rubber in between. They're not the best. They're cheap for a reason. You get what you pay for. And I got these for, they came with the headers that I bought. Do not recommend these type of gaskets. Now, let me pick that back up. Gaskets I do recommend, they are a graphite, really thick gasket. So they do compress. You gotta start it up, get it warm. See how thick that is? Let's compare it to side by side. The thickness of these things, much different. So this one right here will compress quite a bit. And that's what's so great about it. It provides a little bit of tension on the clamping force, whereas this one doesn't really compress. So once you get it tight, it's really not going to get much tighter. It's not going to have any preload, I guess you could call it. And this one fits better. I got one on the other side. I only had time to replace that one over there because this passenger side wasn't leaking, so I just left this one on there. I should have done it both at one time, but alright, so now the trick is to get it in there without destroying it, especially since I got the exhaust hooked up. Now this is the easier side to do it. The driver's side is the hardest one because you got the master cylinder in the way and everything like that. So just for an example, I got plenty of space, as you can see on this side. Grab the phone. So there's plenty of space over here. But once you move over here, you lose all your clearance. It's much harder to work. You got next to no room because of that brake master cylinder in the way. Now, let's get back to business. Stand. So I'm just going to sneak this up underneath. And pull the header out. So some people like to come from the top, but these are designed to be placed through the bottom. Okay, so just a few threads on the first front bolt. Now we'll line the gasket up by going to the rear bolt. We'll thread this one in next. Nothing wants to line up right now. Alright, let's do this one. Okay, that one's threaded. So the gasket's pretty well lined up, but I just can't get this one threaded in there. This is where I need 3 hands. Oh, let's sneak this one down in there. Let's get what I can threaded. That should help out. I got the one on that port threaded. This back one should go in pretty nice. And there it is. Smooth. And then there's this terrible one right here. which thread's okay. It's just hard to tighten. There we go. So now you want to tighten from, see if I can get a pointer here. You want to tighten from the center outwards. You don't want to just start tightening from one side and then going all the way down, because as you tighten these, the gasket is going to expand. The metal is going to expand. So you want to make sure you tighten from the center outwards. That's going to make sure that you protect the gasket, and one, don't warp the header flange, which is a really thick piece of metal. It's about, looks like a 1/2 inch thick flange, but it's just good practice to go from center of the object, tightening outwards. That way you just never encounter any problems with metal warpage, stuff like that. I'm gonna have to tighten this in a sequence a couple of times, so I'm just gonna go just snug everything up and start tightening things down. You want to use a torque wrench. I can't obviously get a torque wrench in on all of these bolts. Tightened up quite a bit of header bolts in the past, so I'm not too worried about over torquing any of these. I am worried about just getting this one generally tight. Let's take that off of there. Go up here. Okay, now I can get to it. And I can't get really the box end on it either because of the way the header tube moves so close to it. And this head of this bolt's a little rusty. Snug. I'll get that a little tighter. Okay. Now I can move to this one. This one I can get the box end on. A little bit more space between this tube and the bolt head. Now that one's loosened up a lot since I've started tightening. Like, I snugged it, and as you can see, everything's pushing flat and compressing that gasket, so now this one's loose again. So I'll go back and tighten that up in a minute. that. I'll go to this back port. Snug these up and start over. Again, working from inside to outside. That's what you want to do. Get it snug. Starting over. So now it was loose, right? Now I can't turn it. Because once I started tightening up all these other ones, the flange started to shift. So things work a little weird. Okay. I can feel the gasket kind of giving a little bit as I tighten it. Take this plug wire out just temporarily. Oop, almost out. A little bit more. What I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to take this on a road test, get these gaskets, this gasket nice and warm, because when stuff gets hot, it gets softer, especially these gaskets. So I'll go for a run around the block, and then when I come back I'll have to tighten them again. I've noticed the mic on my this truck drive by. The mic on my phone is far better than the mic on my computer. You know, it is a hardwired device, so it is pretty good. The one on my headphones, however, is USB and it's wireless, so it does take a little bit of the quality out of it for the sound. So I gotta get a boom mic for my computer for when I'm gaming. Back to the front. And to the rear. So I can put these plug wires back in. Click. Click. Alright, rear gasket. bolt. Okay. Now I'm going to check this one again, make sure it really compressed a whole lot. Okay. So 30 minutes in and I've done replaced a one header gasket. And a large portion of that time was really just getting my life together. So I probably spent about 20 minutes actually doing the work. So after I get back with the truck, I'll be working on the motorcycle. I got to change a fuel petcock for the tank, so it's leaking. How am I going to do this? Just keep the camera rolling. Move the truck outside. Yeah, I don't need to go anywhere. I just need it to warm up. So I'm going to move this stuff outside real quick. So I'm actually using my wife's tripod. And it's working out pretty well. Ooh, maybe tighten that piece. My messy garage. I really got to clean this thing up. Put this intake tube back in. Take that out of there so I don't lose it. Alright, now that that's squared away, let's pull the bike over here. Oof, light was bright. Got boxes stacked. Christmas. Let's clean up the garage floor. Probably going to be kneeling down. Trying to get to the fuel tank. Carbs are probably mostly empty already. Let's see, does that work? Gonna lower this. All right, always starting with the seat. So it's a 93 Honda Nighthawk 750. I absolutely love this bike. I picked it up for about $1,400. Put a lot of work into it. If somebody's watching, please drop a comment so I know I'm not crazy talking to myself. Particular problem I have with this right now is that the fuel selector valve is leaking. So whenever I stop riding, it continues to leak fuel until the carbs are empty. It is a vacuum operated fuel petcock, so it doesn't leak all the fuel out of the tank. It's not entirely gravity fed, but it is slightly annoying. So let's get this tank off of here. I think it's a 12 millimeter. I think. Yep, one bolt for the back, vacuum line, and then a fuel line. I like to use this tool compartment. Also like to use my nifty magnetic tray. Just throw the bolt. That way you don't lose all your stuff. You can stick it to the frame. And it'll sit there. So let's get this camera down in here so you can see what I'm doing. So what I'm messing with in particular is I've got to get this. This is the fuel selector valve. So it's actually leaking on this diaphragm right here. So let me get a screwdriver. Little pointy thing. Get a pointy thing. My drawer of pointy things. Find the appropriate size pointy thing. Okay, so this is the vacuum diaphragm. So it's actually the pump. So this vacuum line goes to one of these intake runners right here. And what that does is every time the valve pulses, it pulls vacuum on this and then moves this diaphragm just ever so slightly, which then pulls fuel from the tank and into the fuel filter here. So as you can see, this fuel filter's got plenty of fuel in it right now. It's because I've got the valve turned off. So this valve is in the off position. On, and then reserve. It's right here. So if I had left this in the on position, this would have drained fuel, or at least evaporated all this fuel out. So I've noticed that too. So every time I have to ride the bike, if I don't want it to leak, I just turn this off. Then all the fuel kind of stays in here because it doesn't actually get to this vacuum diaphragm. So I'm going to take this apart after I get the tank off. In the way. There's the vacuum line. The tank can come off. I need a place to set it. I'm not going to tear it up. Okay, so just a couple tidbits of information. things I've done to this bike. So these are the carbs. There's 4 carbs, one per cylinder, 4-cylinder motorcycle. I took all these carbs off and I rebuilt them and retuned them. So I got a little bit more power out of it. I did modify the exhaust a little bit, so I needed to change the fuel. So anything you change on a small engine greatly affects fuel ratio. So a more free-flowing exhaust will make the carbs a little bit leaner. So you got to add fuel. You mess with putting a header on there, probably got to add fuel. Change the intake to where it can get more air, add fuel. But if you make this less restrictive, it could cause problems with these particular carbs, because these are constant velocity carbs, which require a lot of restriction to work. So in order for these to work without the air box, you then have to restrict the intake. Kind of defeats the purpose. These air boxes are tuned to get the best performance out of these carburetors. There is a carburetor set I'm going to get from, I think Murray is the name. So Murray Carbs, they have some, they're not slide vacuum carburetors. They're more of a mechanical carburetor versus a constant velocity slide velocity carburetor, whatever the technical term is. I don't know. Regardless, these are going to be replaced with some better performing carbs. They won't be better in terms of fuel economy, but they'll be better for power, and that's what I'm ultimately wanting. Is more power out of this bike. It's already fun, super fun. But let's get to this fuel petcock. I'll clean a spot on the workbench to get this moving. Problem with being a gearhead, you collect so much stuff. So many tools, so many projects. And no time for everything. Yeah, so much stuff everywhere. Alright, what does that look like? Okay. Much happier about this situation. Throw some towels down so I don't scratch my tank. Some styrofoam. to set the tank on this styrofoam right here. Clean this thing off first. Okay. It's wintertime here, so there's really not a whole lot of riding the motorcycle, because there's ice on the roads and everything like that. Okay. So now what I'm worried about is this tank leaking on me. Okay, that's sturdy enough. I'm not going to crush it. Okay, the new parts. So the reason why I opted for a whole new petcock here is because, one, it was cheaper. So I've got this, if you see this screen right here, to get the screen, seals and stuff like that, to rebuild it would have been more expensive than just ordering this off of Amazon. So I ordered this one off of Amazon, and the only difference that it had was that this was clocked 180 degrees the other direction. So all I did was take the screws off. The diaphragm stayed there, so there's a spring behind here. So what I did is, when I pulled this off, I held the other plate on. There's a plate and a gasket in there, and I just turned this piece 180 degrees, put it back on, and tightened up the screws. So great thing is that it is absolutely identical, nearly identical to the factory one. It was just clocked differently. So reading the reviews, it works absolutely the same. On is up at the top, of course, off, and then reserve. So I love getting parts off Amazon sometimes. It's like a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to get. I do know that this pickup tube is taller on this one than the factory one. So the solution I have for that is I'm just going to cut this to match the length of the factory one. So I'm not going to have a problem with, okay, so it's in the tank, fuel level comes down, and this is when it stops picking up fuel on the main on. When it goes to, see, I want this lower so that I have less of a reserve, more of a main fuel setting, if that makes sense. So my fuel level slowly drops to the point to where it hits the top of this pickup tube, and then it's no longer picking up fuel when it's in the on position. So once it gets down past this brass tube, then you have to go select it to reserve, and then it picks up from down here. So I don't know what people think. They want more of a reserve or they want less of a reserve, but I'm going to go with a factory expectation here, and I'm going to cut this down. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I can always do it later, but we'll see how big of a difference it is. And this, of course, just sits on top and pushes down into there. So now you have a fuel screen to pick up your fuel, to filter your fuel. It's like the pre-filter. Keeps all the crud from the tank getting into the main part of the system. So set this here. See what I'm working on. Okay. I'm just going to get an adjustable wrench. Not super tight. It's not carrying any load, so it doesn't need to be super tight. All it's got to do is just seal. That's it. Scratch the back of my tank here. There's not a screen on this original fuel petcock, which would explain why trash in the carburetor was a problem. I was wondering why I was always getting trash in the fuel filter. Now I know why. There's no screen. There's no screen on this. So the pickup screen is absolutely missing, or it's sitting in the bottom of the tank. So yeah, it's probably sitting in the bottom of the tank somewhere. There's supposed to be a screen on here. There's an O-ring. Alright, so let's clean this up. Nope, it's got trash on it. Ooh, I'll use that for working on doing some woodworking. I had some paper towels in here, but I have since used them all. A little crud sitting here on where the gasket, where the O-ring goes. I don't want it to cause problem sealing. Tank's pretty clean. So, difference in pickup tube length. Okay, so I wouldn't call that a significant difference, but I would say it is nicer to have more of a reserve, so I'll probably keep that the same. I mean, it's better to have to change your selector valve to reserve sooner than to run out of fuel, because I can't add fuel, but I can always change my selector valve. Focus. I can always change my selector valve and still have fuel left, so I think I'm going to keep it the length that it came, because I can't add to it, but I can always take away. So if it becomes a problem, then I'll take it back off, and then I'll cut it to be this length. So I'm going to save this one because I can always rebuild it, because all it's going to take is one gasket, one diaphragm right here. So underneath this is the diaphragm, and then this is sealed on here, so it's riveted. There's probably an O-ring on a selector shaft in there that could be replaced, and if need be, I could do it. I would just have to then tap this hole where this rivet is, and then put a screw like they've done here. So essentially they've taken an old one and rebuilt it. So not a problem. Easy fix if needed. So if I rebuild this, then I'll end up tapping those screws, those holes right here. Alright, so this is going to go on, and then we're going to start the bike up and make sure it doesn't have any leaks. Press that down in there. And I'm going to take this O-ring. I'm just going to set it there. Maybe I'll just slide it down first. That works better. Again, it doesn't need to be super tight. You just want to make sure you can't spin it by hand. Because all this thing has to do is just hang there. It take any load or anything. You just want to make sure that you can't spin it easily by hand. So I can spin it a little bit. Of course, that will happen. There isn't only an O-ring there. I'll give it just a little bit more. Okay, I like that better. As I'm trying to select fuel, I won't inadvertently turn it the wrong direction. Like I said, I'm going to rebuild this one. Because it is the key-in carburetor original. This one does not have the key-in stamp on it. This piece is removable on both. There's probably a spring down in here too. Alright. I'm going to move the camera back. Put the tank back on. Make sure it's not leaking anything. Let's turn it on. Okay, the on position. And I need a better camera setup. Something a little bit easier to use. All right, let's go lower. Now you can see what I'm working on here. What am I working with? As you can see, everything lines up the way it was. It is a little closer to the cylinder head here than I would like. It's harder to get my fingers around, but it still works and functions the same. Twist this just a little bit. There we go. All right, I got full swing. Let's hook the vacuum line back up. Might need a new vacuum line. That's awfully loose. This is probably the original one, or close to it, from '93. Alright, this fuel line on here. Some pliers. Don't know where my needle nose pliers went. Use these. Wife and kids are home. Just put that on there. Now it's not going to run any fuel until I start this up, and then you won't be able to see, you'll be able to see it in there, in the fuel filter. It'll start pulsing. This is going to be quite loud. Back on first. I'm worried that vacuum line is not tight enough to create a good enough seal, and it's going to cause running problems. Guarantee you. So I'm going to move the bike outside so I don't get exhaust fumes all in my garage. Let's get the side panels back on in the tank, the seat. Fortunately, I'm not going to be able to go for a ride because the salt that they put on the road it's like a brine. It gets everywhere, and I really don't want any rust on this frame of this motorcycle to develop, so I'm not going to be riding it today. Kit back in the right spot. Alrighty. So some of the things I've done. So I swapped out the stock shocks for these gas shocks with progressive springs. So the ride quality was a lot better after doing that. Probably just because my stock shocks were crap. I put a new tire on it, a little bit larger rear tire. Turn this headlamp off. So a little bit larger rear tire I did about a month ago. Replaced the clutches inside. They were a little bit shot. They looked close to original. They probably were been replaced once. It looked like it had been taken apart once before. But regardless, I put a new clutch pack on there, stopped slipping almost immediately after doing that. Like I said, I rebuilt and rejetted these carburetors. I put these crash bars on the front here. I took all of the inner baffles out completely. I put this front fairing and headlight on here. Worked out pretty well. It looks pretty good. It didn't have a fairing on it originally. So I'm gonna get to the point where I'm gonna paint this one. But I don't want to do that until I paint the rest of the bike. And then this gauge cluster I adapted from the European one. So it reads in kilometers an hour, not miles an hour. But I like the look of it better than the stock one. A little bit more sporty. And I put lower, more forward-leaning handlebars. And I swapped out my levers for these Honda ones. Let's focus. There. So these are adjustable for width and they fold up. Probably more for off-road, or you hit something that doesn't bend or break your controls. They'll just move. And I put the LED turn signals and stuff on there. The other ones were so dilapidated, they were falling off. It looked like hell. But that's what I've done. Future plans, I gotta reseal this valve cover gasket or get a new one to put on there. It's been leaking for a while. I'm gonna get the larger oil cooler. I'm going to eventually try to build my own stainless steel header, but I'm not quite there yet in my welding skills. Getting better though. I built that back rack for the truck for camping. That turned out really well. So that was it for today in the garage. I'm gonna clean up all this stuff, and then later on I'm gonna get on and play some Warzone or something. So join me later for some gaming.